Excited to welcome Washington Wizards assistant coach JJ Outlaw to the Basketball Podcast. JJ Outlaw is a dynamic and experienced NBA assistant coach, currently serving as an assistant coach for the Washington Wizards under new head coach Brian Keefe. Outlaw has been a valuable member of various NBA coaching staffs, including stints with the Cleveland Cavaliers, Memphis Grizzlies, and the Los Angeles Lakers. Outlaw's journey to the NBA began with a successful football career at Villanova University, where he was drafted by the Philadelphia Eagles. After 2 seasons in the NFL, he transitioned to the world of basketball, leveraging his competitive spirit and athleticism to excel in a new sport. His NBA coaching career has been marked by a strong focus on player development and a deep understanding of the game. Outlaw has worked under renowned coaches like Phil Jackson, Mike D'Antonio, and Jay Bickerstaff, gaining invaluable experience and insight into the intricacies of coaching at the highest level. JJ, welcome to the Basketball Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
This is fun. Obviously, we have some mutual connections that brought us together, and then did some research on you. And I was curious, I was just asking you just briefly, is there anyone else that has transitioned from the NFL to the NBA coaching?
I think the only answer to that would be my father. Obviously, there was a model there that I was able to follow. He played 11 years in the NFL and then also had various coaching roles in the NBA for 14 years with the Nuggets, Wizards, and Bobcats, obviously, and now Hornets. And people always think that it's a out of the box idea and that they don't really see the connection in it. And I think for me, it was obviously very close to home. It was at home. And it was something that I always thought that I could do, something that was attainable and never really seemed that wild.
It didn't seem that wild because you made it happen, of course. But talk to us a little bit about that transition then. Was that something you actively seeked out when your career was over? And then maybe give us a nuance. What is something that we might not expect that has actually been a huge benefit from that transition?
Yeah, I think it is something that I sought out after I was done playing. I think all athletes, regardless of sport, you're trying to figure out what you want to do after that's over and what your transition is going to be. And for me, I was fortunate enough to play football, and I go to college to play football and play in the professional ranks for a small amount of time. But I never really wanted to do anything else but coach in the NBA. And I say coach in the NBA, but I really just wanted to coach basketball. I always felt a connection to the smaller group, the more intimate groups of basketball, opposed to the larger numbers and more singularly focused way of coaching football, whether it's just position coaching, offense, defense, special teams, whatever it may be. I always really liked the collaborative efforts that basketball coaches put into all phases of the game. Obviously, growing up, the staffs weren't as big as they've now become, but obviously player development and attention to our players and their maturation process has become more and more important as time has gone on, and staffs have grown, and we're starting to be a little bit more singularly focused, but everybody has their different specialties, and that's what makes it great when everybody can come together and be there to provide services for our players.
And the diversity of experiences within a staff is really a beautiful part of it, isn't it? It makes it so much interesting just being around a group of people, not just the players, but the people around the support staff as well. And that's got to be a big piece that you can bring to it.
Yeah, I like to bring the different experiences that I've had within sports, within athletics, the business of professional sports at a couple different levels. And I think the one thing that I've always tried to get across to the players that I've worked with, especially the young guys as they just come into the league, is to take advantage of the opportunities that are being given, take advantage of the services that are being offered. And for me, when I was younger, those are things that I feel like I didn't necessarily take advantage of in my own career. And I won't say I live with regrets, but I'm trying to make it right for myself now and make sure that some of these young guys that I work with don't go down that same path.
Again, you've experienced it. You've experienced it in a lot of different ways. So it's beautiful to be able to share that. And I know that's one of the topics we're going to talk about is this concept of maturation and this concept of kind of developing within a professional sport is obviously a unique challenge for a player. So maybe first just start by, how do you define kind of player maturation, and especially in the context of kind of player development and the different things that kind of you've been a part of through your career?
Absolutely. I think the maturation is all encompassing, if you will, right? It's the player development, it's the IQ, it's the learning how to be a pro, it's the medical, we call it back of house, it's the weight room, it's the training room, it's the recovery, it is the understanding that your fuel, your body is your business. So what you put into your body, your fuel is what's going to allow you to perform at a higher level for longer. You get to this level and everybody is talented. And for the most part, everybody is in shape. But what allows you to do what you can do, your God-given ability and what you've worked at longer than everybody else. And I think those are the guys that you see have separation in this league, and it ends up changing careers and lives. So when we talk about the maturation, it's not just the ability or the skill development that we talk about. It's how you contribute to the environment. We like to use the word environment over culture because that's what the guys are walking into every day. And so how do you contribute to that environment? How do you contribute to being a professional, and how do you participate in that as a player? And when we talk about maturation, that's what we're talking about. It's not just the skill development or the skills on the floor.
I love the use of environment because I feel like when we talk about culture, it's this abstract thing. But when we talk about an environment, it's something that you can actively create and control a lot more. So I love that. With that kind of maturation process, let's maybe start with the bad side of it. Mm-hmm. There's a danger. You see something. It doesn't have to be a bad thing necessarily, but you see something that maybe, okay, if you continue down that path, it's going to delay your maturation, it's going to delay your development. What are some steps from an intervention standpoint that you can follow as a coach?
I think one, it's, players will always listen to coaches. They will always have that mentorship from coaches. But I think it's really important when a young player comes into the league that some of the older veteran guys really take them under their wing and explain to them how things are supposed to work, how you have injury prevention. For example, when I was in Cleveland, Brandon Knight, one of my all-time favorite players too, that I've worked with. He wasn't getting many minutes at that point in time of his career in Cleveland, but every day he was in the weight room, in the recovery room, on the floor, working at his game, but making sure that he recovered. And one of the things that he always spoke about to Darius Garland is, I've had injuries in my career. You don't want to get to this point where you have to be in here. You want to be preemptive with this stuff. And I think Darius really listened, especially coming from a guy like Brandon Knight. That was way more valuable than anything that I could offer in that space. And so I think when you have good veterans on your team, there's a value to that, and that those guys do a great job of talking to the young guys and letting them know what it is to be a professional, how to approach certain situations. And I think that's always better. They always say like a player coach team is always better than a coach team. And I think those things are really good for young guys to hear, not just from coaches, but also from veterans that have been through it.
That's such a great example of prehab versus rehab, and they're completely
Absolutely.
different. And
Absolutely.
I'm curious from this mentorship perspective, like I find at the younger levels, at least youth levels, like we have to orchestrate those relationships a little bit. Is that the same case at the NBA or professional level in sport, where we have to go to some of those mentors and say, hey, listen, it'd be really great if you helped out this guy?
I think so. I think so. I think I don't know that there's much of a difference there, to be quite honest with you, from the youth and grassroots levels to the professional. I think there are those guys that are going to seek out that mentorship, that maybe they've had really good mentors throughout high school, college, and they're looking for that mentorship as they enter the professional levels. But I think for the most part, people are a little bit shy. And a lot of times I think it's fair to assume that people don't know what they don't know. And so I think organizing that and being a go-between or conduit between that. And I've done it with guys that are on the team, but I've also done it with guys that are on other teams that are willing to reach out to a young rookie in a different organization to say, hey, if you ever need anything, here's my number. Reach out to me. If you have any questions about anything, the business. Obviously, they may not know the ins and outs and the inner workings of a particular organization, but the life of a professional athlete, how to handle things with your family, how to handle things with friends, how to handle a lot of the stuff that happens outside of the gym. Guys have always been willing to be mentors that way to younger players.
Whether it's out of house or in house, is that just a question of finding kind of a commonality between two players? Maybe they're from the same area, maybe they're from the same school, or some type of common thing?
Yes, it's same area, same school, same agency. And then I think what you find too is a lot of guys have similar situations. And what I mean by that is a lot of these guys are moving to a new city where they don't know anybody outside of the organization. Their brother or best friend or cousin or whatever the case may be, mom, dad is moving to that city with them. How can they help their lives in that point? Like, how can they handle things with the house? How can they furnish the home? How can they take care of the leases or the mortgage, whatever the case may be, that allows a young player to just focus on basketball, right? You can either be a contributor to that or you can be a distraction. And I think you've seen it both ways. And I think hearing that from other players that have been through a similar thing, maybe they say, hey, I wish I would have had my brother handle this for me, or I wish I would have had my best friend who was living with me handle this for me. That would have made my life a lot easier. The transition from college to the NBA would have been a lot easier. And again, that transcends like all sport, right? That's MLB, that's NBA, that's NFL, NHL. It doesn't matter. Those things are extremely helpful when you know how to navigate them.
You've been around both sports in different contexts over a long time now. So I'm curious, like these type of mentorships and these type of relationships, how have they evolved over time? Maybe going beyond, say, the business of basketball. Now we're into personal branding. We're into these more business focused type of players and relationships. So I'm curious if you've seen differences beyond that.
I think when I first came into the NBA 14 years ago, I was just trying to figure out my own way. And I was in a lot of ways learning from the older guys that were around me. Obviously, Kobe Bryant is the name that is at top of mind, but also Derek Fisher's, Matt Barnes, Pau Gasol. These are all guys that I was around when I was in LA that really had a huge impact on the way that I saw the game and the way that I coached. Another name that comes to mind too is Ed Davis. There was a lot of times throughout practices where, you know, when you're young, you want to do something, you want to do it hard, you want to get the guys going. And sometimes it takes an older veteran player that's been around to say, hey, Jay, maybe that's not the right way to go about this. And you have to be open-minded and you have to have a growth mindset and take that constructive criticism and apply it to your everyday. And so when I was younger, for me, I think I just wanted to do everything hard and prove that I belonged. And as you get to be older, it's not so much learning from the players, but you want to give back to the game that's given you so much, and you want to be a mentor in that way. And I've had conversations with guys about real estate, about their branding. A lot of guys are going through situations now where they're trying to figure out what shoe companies to sign with. And again, I don't have extreme intimate knowledge of those things in that part of the business, but I think that everybody is looking to be able to identify what you're looking for when it comes to a brand, your name, your family. I think those things are very important. And just being a sounding board sometimes for guys to talk to is something that I take extreme pride in.
That's beautiful. Holding space for players is obviously half the job of a coach, especially at that level, and part of maturation, psychological, emotional development as well. So maybe let's hit the first piece, this concept of kind of resiliency, mental toughness, developing that to another level, because again, at every level you move up, it just gets heightened how important those things are.
Absolutely. I think we are at a time right now in professional sports, the NBA in particular, where the mental part of the game is very important to not only the players, but the coaches and most importantly to the organization. Having those resources where guys can go and talk to professionals that specialize in the mental health and focus is extremely important. I think obviously throughout time, we have had spaces where players can go in and go to the weight room and they can get recovery and they can be on the table, but to have a designated space, a designated person, a designated coach that specializes in mental health, mental resiliency, and just making sure that muscle and that part of the game and life is worked out just as much as anything else is extremely important.
So one of the changes that from talking to many of you in the NBA space, one of the changes that's evolved over time is this concept of only one time at the facility. That trying to organize everything around a player only having to come to the facility one time. And I'm curious if that's been something that you've noticed over time that's been a big change, rather than having them come back later at night or have 2 days or anything like that. It's a one time and then you're free, but really valuing a player's time, because that leads to this kind of emotional relaxation, whatever we want to call it, but that helps them become the better version of themselves.
Absolutely. I think you're always going to have guys that want to come back at night. Again, I mentioned you come to a new city, And it's not even that. Sometimes it's just part of guys' routines. They want to come back at night. They want to get work in. And of course, coaches and development coaches, we make ourselves available for them for that. Again, we provide a service where they feel like they can come in here and they can get better at any point in time, day or night. But from a scheduling perspective, we want it to be a one-stop shop, right? We want them to be able to come in. We want them to get on the table. We want them to get in the weight room. We want them to get onto the floor. We want them to go back into the weight room, the training room, whatever it may be. So now they have their post-workout or their post-practice recovery. There's food, right? So they start the day off with breakfast. They leave with lunch, and everything is here for them. It's not a situation where they have to rip and run and come back and come forth. And again, I'm in a city right now in DC where going back and forth is really not conducive from a time standpoint. And so to have everything here in-house for our players where they feel, and we mentioned that word environment, right? They feel that they're getting everything they need professionally from this environment is extremely important to not only the coaching staff, but to the organization as well.
I know you've been in a lot of player development spaces over your time in the NBA so far, and with different coaches and different philosophies. So I'm curious, do you have a preference? Like you reference players coming back to be able to work with a coach. Like some teams assign you a player, some teams, obviously it's a little more variable. Is there a preference in terms of how you orchestrate or organize those type of relationships and those type of development experiences for a player?
I'll be honest, I don't know that I have a preference in terms of whether a guy comes back and who he works with. I think sometimes the player makes that preference, right? If they've been assigned somebody that they work with on the staff. But even with that, now our staffs have grown so much where we just have unbelievably talented player development coaches, and that is just their area and their expertise. And so I think it does a couple of things, right? It gives the players an opportunity and a space to be able to call, text one of their player development coaches to come back in with them at night or early in the morning. And it gives the coaches an opportunity to focus sometimes a little bit more on the X's and O's or their particular side of ball, more team things, more basketball things, aside from the player development. Everybody gets what they need. The players get the time that they need on the floor, and then the coaches get the time that they need to prepare either for the next practice or the next workout, whatever the case may be.
It's fun. And I know you've been a part of a lot of different coaching staffs, as we referenced already, but let's go to two kind of, I wouldn't say extremes, but Mike D'Antonio and Phil Jackson, two different offensive philosophies. So and again, I can't imagine a more beautiful kind of cohesion to develop you as a coach. So from those two type of examples, let's say, and I know you've had other ones, where do you stand in terms of offensive philosophy, having experienced these different things?
I will say this. So that I came in after I spent 5 years in LA with a myriad of coaches, but I came in after Phil Jackson. So my first coach in LA was Mike Brown, who gave me my first opportunity in the NBA in the video room. But to answer your question, I will say this. I think I really enjoyed getting to learn offense at a young age. I couldn't have asked for my first coach, obviously, like I said, was Mike Brown. So getting to learn the defense and his attention to detail at a young age was extremely important for me and has done a lot for me in my career from the way that I approach things from a defensive standpoint. But then the opportunity to work with Mike D'Antoni and his offense, the fast pace, he did a really good job of tailoring his offense in different places to the personnel that he had, and doing his offensive books and working with him in that was something that I will always cherish in my career. And I think for me, when I look at how I approach offense and spacing, it's probably more aligned with what Mike D'Antoni has preached and coached over the time of his career. I will say this, though, in terms of the triangle offense and the Princeton offense, I've had an opportunity to work for some coaches that have run that as well. Obviously not Phil Jackson, but some coaches that have run that as well. And I think that my defensive philosophies are a little bit more aligned with that, right? Hard rules, read and react. If they do this, then we do this. If the ball is driven here, then we react this way. Everybody has a job. Everybody moves on a string. And I think from the two two different standpoints and offensive philosophies. I probably align a little bit more offensively with Mike D'Antoni, but the rules that the triangle and the Princeton offense have, I probably apply that a little bit more to my defensive philosophies, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. And that's a fascinating way of thinking about it. And it just shows you how kind of both sides of the ball influence your philosophy in different ways. So maybe,
Sure.
and we were going to go there anyway. So let's get into your defensive philosophy a little bit. Give us some of those kind of defensive philosophies that you would say are your musts or your non-negotiables or your things that are, these are the things that I think must happen for us to be successful defensively.
Absolutely. I think number one, you have to be a no middle team. I think players at this level are just way too good when you allow the ball to get to the middle of the floor, when you allow the ball to get to the paint. So being a no middle team, that talks to all positions. That talks to 1 through 5. Everybody has a role in protecting the paint and being a no middle team, right? I think the second piece of that is now protecting the paint. And how do you do that? You can utilize your bigs, obviously, to protect the paint. You utilize your rotations on your second side to protect the paint. But again, everybody has a role in that, right? Whether you're a big and you have to come over to protect the paint from the second side, from the opposite side, or whether you're a wing and now your positioning is allowing you to protect the big because he goes to protect the paint. Everybody has a role in that. So I would say, number one, my biggest philosophies is being, number one, a no middle team. Everybody has a role and a responsibility in that. And then protecting the paint. Obviously, a lot of that becomes on the bigs, but then the smalls and the wings have a role and responsibility in protecting the bigs when they protect the paint and protect the rim. Different places that I've been, we've created shot profiles defensively, which essentially says that we want to eliminate the high profile shots, right? We want to eliminate corner threes. We want to eliminate shots and attempts at the rim. We want to force tough contested twos and above the break. We want to shot challenge and contest everything above the break. And if some of those shots happen to go, the above the break threes, the 0 point, if you will, tough contested twos, then we're willing to live with that.
Take us a little deeper in terms of the defensive shot profile. So what would that look like for you as a coach? You get that after the game, you get that in game. What are we talking about in terms of some of
I
that
think
information?
I think it's the way you live, right? I think that it's something that you have to make very clear to your team. I think that everybody on your team and your staff needs to be very clear and be aligned in that. And I think the one thing that I found is creating some of those profiles and those parameters. I think it really keeps everybody aligned and even keel throughout the game. I think players within a game, if certain shots go or they're working their tails off to defend, and some of these great players that we have in our league make tough shots, a lot of times guys hang their head or they run back on the other end of the floor shaking their head. And we want the guys to know that's okay. That's within our profile. You did whatever you could do, all that you could do to shot challenge and contest that shot. Right? It cannot hang over, right? There's more basketball to be played. And so by creating a shot profile, we let guys understand that this is the way that we want to defend. If these shots go, we're okay with it. But these are the ones that we want to eliminate at all costs. Again, the high ones, right? The corner threes, the shots at the rim. We want to defend without fouling, keep teams and players off of the free throw line.
So you're essentially evaluating the player independent of the outcome of the possession based on this
Absolutely.
shot profile. Yeah, I love that.
Based on a profile, and we're defending as a unit, right? No guy, no player should ever feel like he's on an island. Now, don't get me wrong. There are those possessions where you're going to have to guard your yard. You're going to have to be a boss on the ball. But again, with that, we want to force teams into shooting the shots that we want them to take, the shots that are within our profile. And if some of those happen to go, then we're willing to live with that.
Talk to me a little bit deeper about no middle team and specifically the technique in terms of the stance. Let's say you're covering the ball in a slot. What are we talking about in terms of stance?
So if we're covering the ball in the slot, it's an all-encompassing term, right? We're going to say no middle. What does that mean? We're going to start that with a stick hand close, right? Stick, right? We're going to close out. We're going to get to the body. We're going to make sure that we are on that high shoulder, right? That we're doing everything we can to influence that ball going to the corner. We don't want to open up and allow straight line drives. A couple of terms that I've heard from different coaches throughout the league is no middle, no paint, right? So again, if you're no middle, no paint, that doesn't allow for straight line drives, and we want to use markers on the floor. So if I'm guarding someone in the slot, I want to send them to that corner. I want to angle them to that corner shift defender who should be presenting themselves in space space. If that corner is now empty, right, then I want to angle that offensive player to the corner. I don't want to allow straight line drives to the paint. Once that ball now goes onto the floor, I want to use a low tactile bump below the hip, right? So now they're not coming up and creating those fouls. And now once I create that tactile bump, I want to show my hands and chest the ball. Right now, it's very difficult for officials to make calls once you show your work. It's when you're younger and in math class, right? You can't just write the answer on the test. The teacher's going to ask you to show your work. And so that's a term that I always use with the guys that I coach. Show your work. That let the officials and everybody in the arena know that you're moving your feet and you're defending with your chest.
Go deeper. Tactile bump. So is that simply showing your hands? What else is it?
So that tactile bump is going to be on the low hip, right? So now I close out, right? That shot is no longer a threat. That ball goes on the floor. Now I have to push off and slide with you, right? I'm not trying to beat you to a spot. So now I allow you to get back to the middle. I want to continue to influence you to going to that corner and dictate you to go where I want you to go. So that tactile bump is now going to make sure that you get off of your line just a little bit, which allows me to show my hands and show my chest.
Beautiful. Love the depth of it. And then, of course, talking to many college coaches, they've felt the same. When we talk to NBA people, one of the biggest influences is how you defend the dead corner. So talk to us a little bit about defending the dead corner.
Dead corner meaning the empty corner?
Yeah, like just the ball in the corner and where we're trying to influence in terms of no middle and different things like that.
We ultimately, from a defensive standpoint, you want that ball. If you have the opportunity from a defensive standpoint, you don't want the ball to get down there, right? If it does happen to get down there, I think it really just depends on what your principles are defensively. How are they bringing the big? Again, if you're a no middle team, your principles remain the same, right? So now you're not necessarily influencing to the corner, but just about on every gym in America, right? There's a name or a city name on that baseline, right? And that dunker hash, you want to angle them towards that hash, right? Keep the ball in that corner, if you will. If a pick and roll comes, it really just depends at this point on what your principles are. Some teams will send the ball to the screen. Again, I prefer to be a no middle team. So I want to down, ice, blue, black, whatever your terminology is on the side. And now once that ball does get down there, we can keep the ball down there.
So definitely that was what I was referring to, is that use of the dunker spot was a defensive philosophy. So I'm glad you brought that home for so many of us. And you referenced a little bit of this, but defending screens, especially the screener's role in defending a screen off the ball. Like traditionally, again, we go 20 years ago, everyone was trying to bump the cutter and different things like that. And it just becomes less and less of a thing nowadays. A little bit of the rules in the NBA where you can't obviously impede progress of the cutter. But talk to us a little bit about what you're teaching now in terms of that player defending the screen.
The player defending the screen, I think it really depends on what type of screen it is and where the pick and roll is, right? You mentioned the bumps.
Let's say it's an off the ball screen. Let's say it's a back screen off the ball. Start with that. We'll go pick and roll. Yeah.
So now if I am defending the screener that is setting a back screen, the first thing that I must evaluate is the person that's getting screened, my teammate that's getting screened, right? Is he a red partner? Is he a switch partner? Is that somebody that I can switch with? Because now if I can switch with that person, then I will probably call switch. And now we can eliminate that screen at the point of attack. If it is somebody that I cannot switch with, if it now creates an advantage for the offense that now I'm going to have a bigger on me, and that's not something that we want, right? We can bring the help from the second side. I can say with the screener, and now we can force that screen, my guy that's getting screened, we can force that underneath the screen, meaning I'm going to force it away from the ball, right? If it's a rip screen off ball, I'm forcing it away from the ball, right? And now I can bring help with my low defender from the second side. I think a lot of times that in pinch action, where you hit the big and now somebody is coming from below to rip screen, right? What they're trying to do is obviously put two on the ball. So now a shooter can come off that DHO or that handoff from the big. A lot of times what we do in the NBA is if that opposite corner is filled, we'll bring the help from that opposite corner, that second side corner. And now really the only play that is available is that lob, that hang time pass, which we can recover to the second side corner.
What, in your opinion, and talking about some of these actions, maybe before we go deeper defensively, what do you feel are some of the hardest actions to guard nowadays?
I think one of the hardest actions, and I can't tell you that I know what it's like to be an NBA player. Very few people do. But one of the things that I get the feedback from our guys in different places that I've been is the stack action that everybody runs that becomes very difficult. I think I obviously have my opinions on how it should be guarded, and I don't think that mine are right all the
Screen
time.
in the
I think
middle of the floor, and then a single
screen in
cutter
the
can
middle of
go
the
off
floor,
either side, and there's spacing in the
either
corners.
side,
So they're going to
right?
catch it with
Yeah.
space. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're gonna catch it with space. I think the hardest thing is one, identifying the stack action, which that responsibility falls on the low screener. So if you're running a mid pick and roll, just say it's a 1-5 mid pick and roll, for all intent and purposes, everybody on the floor thinks it's a mid pick and roll. The one person who understands that it's a stack action is the guy who's low, standing underneath the rim or in the paint, because he can see his man now going up to rip screen or back screen on the big. I think the one thing that the couple things that make it a difficult action is you don't know if that guy is going to screen that big, or now if that guy is a shooter and he's just getting out to space. So I think your scouting plays a huge role in that. How do certain teams run it? Who do they run it with? Do certain players have a tendency to set the screen most of the time in the stack action? Do certain players, a la Buddy Hield, are they slipping out of that most times, right? So if that is the case, then you can play it just the same way you would play your normal mid pick and roll action. But if they are setting that screen, then I think it's very important for everybody to be aligned in your weak and or strong alignment of how you would normally play a pick and roll. So if you want to play a pick and roll, you want to send a player to his left hand, whatever your call may be for that, you can weak it. So now the guard on the ball would be in a weak. The big who is guarding the mid pick and roll would be in a weak. And that small or wing who is below is also in a weak. So you keep everybody in a weak alignment, and now you can keep the ball on that side of the floor, weak or strong, whichever way you decide.
This is why we love the podcast, JJ.
Yeah.
Like you going into depth
I hope
like
some of
that.
that makes sense. I hope some of
That's
that makes
beautiful.
sense.
No, that's beautiful. But also the connection to how Spain pick and roll and some of these other middle stack actions have muddied some of these kind of coverages to figure out, because it's masked a little bit, figure out what to
Sure.
do with it. And then
Sure.
I just want to come back, like you reference obviously
Well,
players talk.
before you go on, Chris,
Go
this
ahead.
is
Go ahead.
this is the hard one, right?
Yeah.
There's also the ability to read the pick and roll, reading or switch the pick and roll, reading whether the rip screen guy actually makes contact with the big, right? So now if the big makes contact with the guard and now the rip screen guy makes contact with the big, you have an opportunity for now your guards to read that out or switch it out. So now the low guard would now take the ball, and the high guard would take the guard that's coming out and or wing out to the top. It's such a difficult action to guard in so many ways to defend it. And I think the one thing that makes it even more difficult is now you'll see teams, they'll run that wide action. If you top lock it, they'll run it, and now they're into stack, right? They'll run so many different actions that get them into stack. And so that just makes it even more difficult to recognize and also to defend.
Isn't it interesting, like how really a simple action, like really it's just a two-player kind
Yeah.
of duet action initially, becomes such a complex problem just because of the spacing and modern spacing and the gravity of players and everything else that goes with it.
Yeah.
I was just fascinated somewhat your players indicating that's one of the tougher things to guard. And I'm curious how much feedback you get from players. Like you go in and you say, let's defend this, and then they start defending it in a practice or a shoot around. How much of the player involvement is there in terms of making some of these decisions?
I think you always have to listen to the players. I think the one advantage that we have as coaches is that we have watched 5, 6, sometimes 7 games in advance of that team that we're playing on that particular night. And from a player's perspective, most players will watch film, they'll watch the edits, they'll watch the cut up. So they have a really good idea coming in of what a team is running, who's been hot on that team, what their rotations are, who the starters are, those sort of things. But I think that, like I said, as a coach, you have the advantage that I've watched 6 or 7 full games. of this team prior to us playing them. And I learned this from Steve Clifford when I was with the Lakers, and we were going through a shoot around one day, and obviously just being a young coach in the video room, we were going through the shoot around, and there were a couple players that had some questions on how things should be defended, and ways that they had done it in the past, that whether it was in LA or with other teams. And Coach Cliff really just asked a simple question, like, how many games of them have you watched? And of course, the players given an honest answer, like one, whatever. Cliff just told him, I've watched 7. This is the way to defend it. And that kind of shut it down right there. And it showed, 1, that he was prepared. It showed 2, that he had given it deep thought and he was paying attention to detail. And it gave the players a lot of confidence that the way that he was saying that it should be defended is actually the correct way that we should do it on that particular night.
I love that story. I'll be using that one
With
too.
that being said, though, I will say this as a coach, right? Again, we all got to have growth mindsets. There's no pride involved in this. And so if we have a coverage and we decide that we're going to play it that way, and guys come over to the sideline, maybe in the first time out in the first quarter, and they say, hey, this just isn't working, we have to figure out a way to get that done. And we have to be willing to make adjustments on the fly so that everybody is aligned and comfortable with the way that we want to defend it.
Yeah, it's just great. It adds credibility to your work as a coach. Obviously, it grows self-efficacy in what you're doing as a coach for your players as well. But it also creates an inclusive environment. But at some point, somebody has to make a decision, right? That's the bottom line. Yeah, in terms of that.
Absolutely.
Talking about that in terms of covering an isolation score, that's one of the hardest things to do, clearly, in the NBA, just covering individual talent. And you mentioned the defensive profile in terms of the type of shot that ultimately, if we give that up and they make it, hey, that we're good.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about kind of the psychology maybe of players covering an isolation score, and then some of the things that you can do to disrupt an elite score.
I'll be honest, I don't know that there's anything you can do to disrupt some of these guys that play in our league. But I think, number one, no player should ever feel like he's on an island. Right. No player in this league should ever feel like he's on an island. Until the day I die, I will always preach that we are defending on a string. We're defending with our core. Everybody has a role. Everybody has a responsibility in every action that we are facing. And if we have a guy who we put on one of these dudes in the league and they get to an ISO, we are going to have a way that we want to force them to go. It may not be a great solution because they are that great of a player, but we will have an ISO coverage for every player that we play that is going to be in a high amount of isolations, if that makes sense. And so, again, we want to keep certain players to their right hand. We want to keep certain players to their left hand. We want to keep them away from their strength. And like I said, if some of these shots go in that we have deemed that we're okay living with, then you tip your hat and you try to keep those to a minimum. But that is going to happen. But no player should feel like they're defending on an island. Everybody should be in a pinch or a shift spot around them, offering support.
Love that. And the switching, we thought was going to become a huge part of the game. It's still a part of the game. Is that the preferred way to defend something if possible? And then secondly, it doesn't seem as possible as it maybe seems at lower levels, right? And talk to us about why that is.
I think at our level, we have a lot of length and a lot of size that we can throw at different players from a defensive standpoint. So your ability to switch, not get into super coverages that are difficult, right? Let's just switch it. Let's make it easy. But there is a technique to switching, right? You have to switch up and you have to switch under. You don't want to create any advantages for the offense. So again, I can understand how the personnel that we have at this level, how that makes switching a lot easier for us. And then again, as you talk about it, getting to the lower levels, right? Some of the grassroots levels, it's a little bit harder to do that. And I will be honest, I think that learning to defend at a fundamental level, learning to defend pick and rolls at a fundamental level, learning to get the ball to the screen, learning to fight over screens, learning how to get back home or to a square stance, having bigs play big positions, right? If you want to trap, if you want to hot, whatever it is you want to do, I think it's extremely important at the grassroots levels and as you're growing to learn how to do those things. And then when you get to a point where, you know, those things are fundamental, then you can read more and more pick and rolls. But again, at our level, sometimes just reading it is just the best thing to do.
What are some of the best things we're teaching in transition defense at your level?
It's always a challenge, right? I think people try to isolate transition defense to just defense, right? There's so many things that play a part in transition defense, right? Your offense plays a part in your transition defense. Your spacing offensively plays a part in your transition defense. Your shot selection plays a part in your transition defense. And I think number one, getting the best possible possession and shot on goal that you can get offensively is ultimately going to help you in transition. And as we all know, it's not rocket science. Like if that ball goes in the hole, now they can play against a set defense, protecting the ball, not turning it over. But just transition defense as a philosophy, we want to get back. We want to protect the paint, protect the rim first. That starts it. And then obviously most teams have running habits offensively that they preach. We have running habits defensively that we preach. If one of our players falls down, right, the ball is the problem, right? So we stop the ball first, and now that player who's the last player running back in transition has to go opposite. We never want to commit to the ball in transition because that's going to create a numeric advantage for the offense, and that's not something that we don't want to give up. You end up giving up shots at the rim, you end up giving up threes that way.
Beautiful. We hear your coaching staff getting excited about your answer, so that's even better.
I don't know if they're getting
Situation.
excited about the answer. They're just walking by making noise.
No, I love it. Talk to me a little bit. It's a great transition, by the way. You're transitioning from one organization to another organization. What are some things we don't think about as outsiders about these type of transitions? Obviously, I know you have a young family. That's a big part of it, settling that. But beyond that, what are some things that maybe we don't think about learning about a new organization or learning about a new coaching staff?
I think one, it's a huge transition for everybody. I think when you have a family, uprooting them from a place that they are very comfortable in, your kids are in school, mine are very young. So I don't have as many issues with that as maybe someone who has older kids in middle school or high school. But you love your home, you love your community, you love your neighbors, your kids are happy, your wives are happy. And so now you go to a new place and you're learning to do everything over again. Sometimes I think, and I'll just speak for myself, sometimes in my position, I grew up this way, right? I had a father who was a coach in the NBA. And so I was very used to spending a certain amount of time in cities and then moving and going to new cities. And as an only child, I used sports a lot of times to make friends. And so I think one thing for me is I take for granted that this is how everybody grew up and everybody should be okay moving from city to city. And that's just not the case. From an organization standpoint, I think you have to have a growth mindset. You're in a new place. Things are done differently. And I think for me, that's part of the excitement is trying to figure out the new processes, who to go to for what, maybe what the video editing software is, what the scouting software is, what the analytics software is, and then learning how to master that so that you can do your job to the best of your ability.
So is there an onboarding process from within the organization that helps you figure out some of these things?
There's an onboarding process from A to Z, honestly. They're going to put you in contact with realtors in the area. They're going to put you in contact with very, very moving companies. They're going to put you in contact with your medical. And again, you don't want any lapses that way. And I think it can be hard because you go to a new organization. I know for me personally, I just want to get right on the floor and take care of the basketball stuff. And I think it's very important to make sure that your families are taken care of, make sure that they're comfortable, and we'll have plenty of time to get to the basketball, get to the X's and O's. Obviously, it's a long season, but making sure that support system around you is comfortable, and then you can get on to the basketball stuff. So there's a lot of in-house stuff that needs to be done, but the organizations in this league are phenomenal at that and making it as easy as possible for you.
I don't think I've asked this before, but curious then, you're
First
familiar
question
with
ever. I'm gonna get a first question ever.
I know.
Let's do
like
it.
300 podcasts, but like you're familiar with the players, obviously, know who the players are for the most part, but you don't necessarily know the players. So coming into an organization, what are some steps that JJ Outlaw does to get to know the players?
I use what I call like nuggets. And I think for me, it's something that I've used throughout my entire career. And nuggets are things that you have in common with other people, right? It may be a love of music. It may be, like you said, like you're from a certain area. You and I have a very good friend, mutual coach, Andrew James, whatever he wants to be called. Coach Dodd is our mutual friend, and we have that in common. And so that's one of the things that I just try to get to know people on a human level. Very little of it is basketball, right? Like I want to get to know Kyle Kuzma. I want to get to know Jordan Poole. I want to get to know Malcolm Brogdon. I want to get to know Bub Carrington and Jared Butler and all these guys on a personal level. And so they understand where I'm coming from as a person. They understand where I'm coming from as a coach. They understand what drives me, the makeup of my family. I want to understand theirs, and then we can get to the basketball.
So you've accomplished a lot so far in your NBA coaching career. So how does JJ Outlaw continue to develop, and talk to us about the value of constructive criticism in that process?
Yeah, I think I could have never imagined. Some people sit and say, I knew I would be in this position. And 14 years ago, I did not think that I would be here. I knew that I wanted to be here. I had goals. And I think for me, it was just listening to a lot of coaches and having some unbelievable mentors, JB Bickerstaff, Bernie Bickerstaff, family to me. And sometimes you have hard conversations with family in an effort to make sure that everybody is growing and everybody is getting better. And certainly those had conversations with them, and those tough conversations at times have allowed me to give back to younger coaches as well. I work with Omar Cook in Cleveland and DJ Ham in Cleveland, and those are guys that I want to see succeed. They're great coaches and they're just now getting into it, so they're going to be great coaches. And one of the things that I always ask is, none of the stuff that I've shared with you today, none of the stuff that I share with the players is personal. I don't own it. Our only responsibility is to pass it on and to continue to give back to the game that's given us so much. Any constructive criticism that I can get from fellow coaches, players, whatever the case may be, I look at that as opportunities to get better.
You made us all better. Thank you so much for sharing with us, and love the deep dives on all those different topics, from maturation, player development, to defense, to obviously just continue to grow and learn as a coach. And it's just a wonderful thing. And we can't wait to watch you in your new location with the Washington Wizards this year.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on, and I hope someone can get something from this episode. But I appreciate you having me on and giving me an opportunity to be on the podcast.